Hello. Today is January 29th, the year 2002. My name is Dr. Tom Bennett. I'm with the Oral History Project for the Battleship New Jersey at Kean University in New Jersey. Today we're aboard the Battleship New Jersey in Camden, New Jersey, and I'm talking with Dr. Louis Ivey, who served aboard the ship as an ensign and lieutenant from 1954 to 1958. Later, he remained in the Navy as a reserve captain and became a surgeon after leaving the Navy. Dr. Ivey, thank you for talking with us today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Let me start off the conversation by exploring a little bit with you. How did you come to be aboard the Battleship New Jersey? And in effect, how did you come to join the Navy and then get on board the ship?
Well, I joined the Navy because I was in college at the time of the Korean War. And I was told at that time that if you maintain a certain academic average, B average, you would not be subject to early military experience. So I stuck with that. However, some of my classmates who were similarly academically where they should be were drafted. And I figured I had better secure my position by joining the ROTC. The ROTC, as far as the Army and the Air Force, was not my interest because I have hay fever and sensitivities, and I always liked the water, so I thought I'd join the Navy. And the Navy, where I went to school at that time, was Temple University. I had to transfer to Penn State because Penn State was one of the 52 universities at that time that offered the Naval ROTC program. So I transferred to Penn State and went into the Naval ROTC program. From there I was commissioned, and that's how come I got into the Navy.
How did you come to serve aboard the Battleship New Jersey? What's the transition from your graduation from college to the Battleship New Jersey?
As a midshipman in my training at college, we took cruises on various ships, PC and a heavy cruiser. PC is a patrol craft. It's very small. And my experiences were rough. Seasickness was my concern. So I went to the Columbus, the heavy cruiser, and that was better. So I figured I'd apply for the next thing largest to shore duty, and that was in New Jersey. I asked for a battleship, not New Jersey by name, but a battleship assignment, and that's what I was given. So I was assigned to the New Jersey, and that's when I reported in February 1954.
Tell me about your first impressions upon coming aboard the ship, your experiences, whatever. When
I first came to the Jersey, it was at night, and I reported aboard. It was after dark. I don't remember the hour, but it seemed as though everyone was asleep except the officer of the deck. So I checked in and reported, and he sent me to various stations along the way for assignments of equipment and room assignment. I was assigned to a stateroom that night, and I crept up to the room, put my things on the deck, and climbed into bed. There was a double-decker bed in the room at the time, and there was someone in the lower deck, so I slept on the top deck. I didn't disturb anybody, so the next morning when I awakened, the officer on the lower deck had checked out, and I had the room to myself. I went down that morning to breakfast in the wardroom, and I was met with stares of different persons, but at the junior table and aboard this ship, the officers were seated in terms of their rank. So the junior officers, ensigns, lieutenant JGs, lieutenants were all seated at a similar table. And those officers where I was seated, we were all roughly the same age, and we'd just come out of college. Some of them I had made midshipman cruises with, so there was nothing unusual there. We were friends. I was accepted as a friend. However, there were some lack of acceptance at some of the more senior tables.
Now, were you the first African-American officer to serve aboard the Battleship New Jersey?
That's my understanding, yes.
Yet why did that one person move out of the room that night? Do you know why that occurred?
He never discussed it with me. As a matter of fact, we never talked at all, but it was my understanding that he did not particularly want to be a roommate of a black officer.
What, at the time you were in the Navy, what was the conditions for African Americans, and especially African American junior officers in the Navy at the time?
At that time, there were very few African American officers. Junior officers was about the extent of it. I think maybe there may have been a captain or lieutenant commander. but that was about it as far as the seniority at that point. We weren't, as far as I can say, I was not treated differently as an officer aboard this ship by the rest of the officer staff and by the captain and the people who were really in charge of the ship. All of my duty stations, I was stationed with more senior officers, and we worked very well. I found that, of course, at that time, the nation itself was not integrated. And to be put in a position where all through college and every other effort at achieving was met with your being one of few blacks who were a part of this, and this was no different. We found that in order to be successful at that time, you had to concentrate on the professionalism rather than the social aspects of what you were doing. And I was well trained at Penn State University and Naval ROTC, and I was qualified as any junior officer at that time for the job that I was to perform.
Could you talk to me a little bit about the jobs or assignments you had aboard the Battleship New Jersey?
My initial assignment was a spotter up in the North Atlantic. We were cruising in February, and when I woke up after checking in, the ship got underway, and my initial assignment was to go topside in the crow's nest, the highest point on the ship, to spot the artillery firing. And of course it was a little chilly up there on that top wind, unbroken. I'm on the open area. So that was a very chilling experience, but I did that. And then when I finally completed that mission, I was assigned to the Baker Division, which is a B Division, AB Division. That was engineering, main propulsion engineering, which was below decks, just the reverse of where I had been. So this was boiler division, and I had some very good, talented, and qualified enlisted people there and warrant officers, and that was my initial assignment, and we got along very well.
So it was common at the time to move junior officers from among several different assignments on the ship so they get wide training then?
Yes, exactly. The line officers were prepared to serve in any division aboard ship, and my assignments at that time were Baker Division, and then I went on to Charlie Division, which was communications, and I was in the department, the operations department, from engineering department to operations. And operations had to do with the navigation and direction of the ship. I was also a part of the air control team in the operations department, which was CIC. So that's the brain, so to speak, of the ship that's below deck.
CIC refers to?
That's where the radar control,
Combat
Information Center.
Sure.
That's where the radar control of activities are conducted. The aircraft that may be in operations with the ship at the time had to be controlled on a radar screen by the officers that were aboard the ship, and I was trained in that capacity, and so I worked there. My final division was the communications division, which had to do with the secret, the classified information, as well as the regular information that came aboard ship. And my division were included members who were trained in communicating skills.
And during your time aboard the ship, you went from ensign to Lieutenant JG.
Correct.
You got a promotion.
Yes.
Promotion's hard to come by for officers at the time, or was it an automatic move?
It was pretty much automatic unless you did something that would disqualify you for promotion.
Talk to me about any other experiences you had aboard the ship during your 4 years, which is quite a long time, that stand out or unique in your mind or important.
I think within the first year, I met quite a few fellow officers, junior officers, whom I became close friends with, and one friend we've been in touch with each other for the last 48 years. My former roommate, Bob Nishman, who was a Lieutenant JG when I left the ship, and that's when I spent time with him during that last senior most level. We were friends both professionally and socially. Also, there's another officer, Ron Esper, who was similarly in my group, and we were close friends. As a Lieutenant J.G. Bill Stiff, who was senior to me, but an ideal, a model officer, and I became very good friends with him, and he helped me in many different ways. He was from the South, even-tempered. He had a very even hand, nothing pushy about him, but he was very bright and an influence in my life. There was one episode aboard ship when I had an upset stomach, and I went to sick bay to speak with the medical staff. Dr. Trapnell was his name, and he examined me and he told me, "You've got gastroenteritis." And I didn't know what that was, so I said, "Well, what is that?" He said, "Well, you just haven't gotten accustomed to eating white man's food." So I looked at him and just went on with that. Other experiences were basically very positive. The more senior officers and I got along well.
Did you get many slights like that, or offhanded comments, or not?
Not to my face, no. I remember that the steward's mates, most of the steward's mates were black or Filipino. Most of the non-enlisted personnel included some of the deck personnel that were black. Seemingly were very happy to see me aboard ship at that time. And many of them would come to me and acknowledge that feeling, and at the same time many would ask for assistance in situations where they felt uncomfortable, and I did what I could for as many as I could. But generally the experience that I had aboard the New Jersey was a positive one, and certainly the commanding officer was very positive, very friendly, and very objective with me, as was my senior division officer. I remember distinctly Commander Parsons was my operations officer. He was a very stiff Naval Academy graduate, but he was fair and he was firm. And the ship had quite a few officers of that caliber. It was truly representative of the Navy, this particular ship. It was first class.
I noticed as I'd done research in the State Historical Library and aboard the ship, I mentioned to you also before the interview that I would look at the various cruise books for World War II, Korea, not Korea yet, but the 50s and into Vietnam, and I watched the changing faces of the crews. During World War II, the stewards group in a certain specific division, led by a white officer, but was either black or Filipino, and that would break up. And then I noticed more integration of crew members gradually through the 50s into the 60s and so on, like that 70s and 80s. Talk to me a little bit about your experiences with the changing diversity of the crew. Were there many problems as the crew became more mixed versus having a separate stewards group?
Well, I think the personality of the ship with regard to diversity was reflective of what was going on in the country. It was really no different. I had all white members in my division, in every division that I was a part of. And there may have been some resentment of my presence, but it wasn't really verbalized to me to an extent that it got my attention. I never had any problems with being accepted as far as command and professionalism were concerned. The diversity that I saw on the ship was basically, as I mentioned, within the steward division and in the deck division. The few blacks that were there that were on the ship were in those two major divisions. Both of them had basically unskilled labor, and that was my experience basically. When we would come in contact with other ships who also had diverse crews, we would I've met 4 or 5 other black officers all of whom were on separate ships. There were never any two black officers on the same ship at the same time, to my knowledge. And I think we as minority officers at that time had similar experiences. Certainly when we would come ashore, we would discuss many times, we would socialize, and we would talk about things that went on aboard ship. And no one really, to my knowledge, expressed a racial slur that detracted from their professionalism or opportunity to do what they needed to do.
Okay. You mentioned earlier that you helped some of the African-American crew members that would come and talk to you, say, as an older brother or mentor. What would you do to help them? Would you just sit and talk with them, or would you take any informal or formal action as an officer to help them in their situations?
Basically, depending on the problem, since they were not in my division, I would sit and talk to them about their problem and try to give them advice as to how to solve the problem. If it required speaking to another officer about it, which was most unusual because the officer basically was in charge of the stewards, and I really don't even know who that officer was. But it would be more sitting down and counseling the particular crew member.
So there was no formal action that you would go write a report out or anything, just
No.
talking and trying to help people get through a certain situation.
Exactly.
Good. Let's move on a bit. Talk me a little bit about the ship, the image the ship had. It was considered a lucky ship, in the Navy, had suffered very few casualties in World War II or in Korea. What was the image of serving aboard the Battleship New Jersey when you left it? What did people say to you about that? It was one of the 4 Iowa-class battleships in the Navy.
Well, certainly in the Navy community, the battleship, in the Jersey in particular, was thought of as a very spit and polish capital ship. The crew was first class in most instances. We were kept spit and polish in terms of the uniform, the respect for one another professionally. It was just a well-run ship. The crew was performance ready at almost all situations. I cannot think of a situation wherein we had a real problem with an operation. We were very fortunate in the sense that we had qualified people to perform the operations of the ship. Aside from that, I couldn't say anything. I know when every port that we would go into, we were greeted. We'd line the ship with the crew, and we would dress the ship to be representative of the United States. And we felt an obligation to conduct ourselves as such. I know when we went to Mayport, Florida on a cruise, the officers' wives, wherever the capital ship would go, the wives in that particular area would arrange a greeting party for the officers. And it was just to socialize, to invite us to the area and make us feel comfortable. And I, as a black officer, the only black officer on the ship, would be, along with the rest of the white officers, but they would never include me in the one-to-one female-male relationship, even though I was single at that time. But the wives in Mayport in particular, the lady who was in charge of this, did meet the ship and did come to me personally and said, we didn't want to be presumptuous and have some young lady here to meet you that you might not want to meet. But if you would like to meet someone, then we will certainly call her. And sure enough, they did. It was a lovely experience. So we had a wonderful relationship aboard the Jersey.
Was the ship, since you served on it just after the Korean War ended, did you notice any changes aboard the ship? Were they cutting back on material supplies, training, or was it still at a highest level of readiness for
We
war?
was maintained at a high state of readiness. There was no cutback that I am aware of. because they kept us busy all the time, and we had to keep the crew busy all the time. There was no lounging around. Whenever the ship was underway, people were working on it all over the ship. And I can recognize now the appearance of the ship today as it was when I was aboard. Not that it was newer, it was well kept, because the teak decks were kept spit and polished all the time. Everything was kept in ideal working order at the time. I do not recall any deficiency, equipment-wise, that we experienced.
Let's move on to a final area that I would like to examine, the impact of the ship on your life. I've talked with a number of crewmen, and they all say in some way the ship has changed them as individuals as they move later on through life. Could you speak about that a bit?
Well, the ship has always been a part of my life since I joined the crew. It's a very special ship. I feel about it as a very special ship. It reflects a lot of things about America that I'm proud of. There are problems. There's no doubt about it that there are problems. But I've had many long friendships. I've had, not many, but I've had 2 officers that I had met that were junior officers with me, and we have stayed in contact over the past 40 years. We are still good friends today. The experience that I had aboard the New Jersey led me to become active even though I had finished my line officer responsibilities and had left the Navy and gone to medical school. When I came back to Howard University as an assistant professor of surgery, I was acting as the Naval Commandant's representative at the university to try to encourage black medical students to become a part of the Navy. And in so doing, I was asked to join the reserve as a medical officer rather than a line officer, which I did. And we have served in that capacity as a reserve officer in many different areas, both Spain, Japan. I went to Japan as the cardiovascular surgeon attending the president's trip, President Jimmy Carter, on 2 occasions. And I was recalled to active duty for Desert Storm. So I left the Navy in retirement in 1991, and I retired as captain.
Now, you mentioned some of your family was involved in the Navy. Could you talk about that for a minute?
Yes, my sons were both influenced by the Navy. They both were in the Navy. My older son, Louis, took advantage of the medical school training program offered by the military. They took the Navy. He went to Columbia University Medical School, and he became a part of the, he was a Navy surgeon in San Diego, and he was a part of the 1st Marine Division. He was the surgeon when they went to Desert Storm and subsequently to Somalia. My other son, Mark, joined the Navy and became an enlisted corpsman in Beeville, Texas, and he's out now. But both of my sons have been in the Navy also.
Any possibility of grandchildren going into the Navy, perhaps in the future?
Well, hopefully they won't have a need for the Navy when he reaches that age. But I'm sure if it's still a need for soldiers or sailors, he might well be a part of it.
2 final questions. Today was the first time you told me that you've been aboard the New Jersey since you left it in 1958. What was your reaction stepping aboard the ship again?
It was a very proud feeling to see the ship in its present condition. It brought back a lot of memories. I toured the ship, and it really brought back memories. And I had my old roommate, Bob Nishman, accompany me. He's here too. And we both it's like going back home, really, as far as we're concerned. The ship will always be a part of my life as far as my memories of it.
Now, you understand today that they, in effect, minted a new award in your honor with your name.
Yes.
Could you explain that? Talk about that a bit.
Well, the award was given to me. They decided to honor me by naming an award after me, that the people who direct the museum ship as it is will bestow upon community members whom they think have achieved a certain community involvement and commitment that has been outstanding. And I am honored to be so honored. I was surprised by this, but it certainly is greatly with welcome that I receive it. I was honored because I was the first black African American aboard this ship as an officer, and the award is representative of someone who has achieved or has taken the initiative to do something positive in the community, which is outstanding.
Well, thank you very much. I've been speaking today with Dr. Louis Ivey, who served aboard the Battleship New Jersey from 1954 to 1958. Came aboard as an ensign, left as a lieutenant JG, later left the Navy, went on to medical school, and became a cardiovascular surgeon. It's been a fascinating conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay.